Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/BrianEDenton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated. Today's reading and reflection is on Chapter 233. Chapter 233. Toward the end of the Battle of Borodino, Pierre, having run down from Raevski's battery a second time, made his way through a gully to Nyasakovo with a crowd of soldiers, reached the dressing station, and seeing blood and hearing cries and groans, hurried on, still entangled in the crowd of soldiers. The one thing he now desired with his whole soul was to get away quickly from the terrible sensations amid which he had lived that day, and return to ordinary conditions of life, and sleep quietly in a room in his own bed. He felt that only in the ordinary conditions of life would he be able to understand himself, and all that he had seen and felt. But such ordinary conditions of life were nowhere to be found. Though shells and bullets did not whistle over the road along which he was going, still on all sides there was what there had been on the battlefield. There were the same sufferings, exhausted, and sometimes strangely indifferent faces, the same blood, the same soldiers' overcoats, the same sounds of firing which, though distant now, still aroused terror, and besides this, there was the foul air and the dust. Having gone a couple of miles along the Mozhask road, Pierre sat down by the roadside. Dusk had fallen, and the roar of guns died away. Pierre lay leaning on his elbow for a long time, gazing at the shadows that moved past him in the darkness. He was continually imagining that a cannonball was flying towards him in a terrific whiz, and then he shuddered and sat up. He had no idea how long he had been there. In the middle of the night, 3 soldiers, having brought some firewood, settled down near him and began lighting a fire. The soldiers, who threw sidelong glances at Pierre, got the fire to burn and placed an iron pot onto it, into which they broke some dried bread and put a little dripping. The pleasant odor of greasy viands mingled with the smell of smoke. Pierre sat up and sighed. The 3 soldiers were eating and talking amongst themselves, taking no notice of him. "And who may you be?" one of them suddenly asked Pierre, evidently meaning what Pierre himself had in mind, namely, "If you want to eat, we'll give you some food, only let us know whether you are an honest man." I, said Pierre, feeling it necessary to minimize his social position as much as possible, so as to be nearer to the soldiers and better understood by them. "By rights I am a militia officer, but my men are not here. I came to the battle and have lost them." "There now," said one of the soldiers. Another shook his head. "Would you like a little mash?" the first soldier asked, and handed Pierre a wooden spoon after licking it clean. Pierre sat down by the fire and began eating the mash, as they called the food in the cauldron, and he thought it more delicious than any food he had ever tasted. As he sat bending greedily over it, helping himself to large spoonfuls and chewing one after another, his face was lit up by the fire, and the soldiers looked on at him in silence. "Where have you to go to? Tell us," said one of them. "To Mozhask." "You're a gentleman, aren't you?" "Yes." "And what's your name?" "Peter Kirillich." "Well then, Peter Kirillich, come along with us. We'll take you there." In the total darkness, the soldiers walked with Pierre to Mozhask. By the time they got near Mozhask and began ascending the steep hill into the town, the cocks were already crowing. Pierre went on with the soldiers, quite forgetting that his inn was at the bottom of the hill and that he had already passed it. He would not soon have remembered this, such was his state of forgetfulness, had he not halfway up the hill stumbled upon his groom, who had been to look for him in the town and was returning to the inn. The groom recognized Pierre in the darkness by his white hat. "Your Excellency," he said, "why, we were beginning to despair. How is it you are on foot? And where are you going, please?" "Oh, yes," said Pierre. The soldiers stopped. "Ah, so you found your folk," said one of them. "Well, goodbye, Peter Kirylich, isn't it?" "Goodbye, Peter Kirylich," Pierre heard the other voices repeat. "Goodbye," he said, and turned with his groom toward the inn. I had to give them something, he thought, and felt in his pocket. "No, better not," said another inner voice. There was not a room to be had at the inn. They were all occupied. Pierre went out into the yard and, covering himself up head and all, lay down in his carriage. All right, so that concludes my reading of chapter 233. I will now proceed to my reflection on the same. A Year of War and Peace, day 233. The Natural Sauce. Deprivation is a great teacher. Consider Candide, who learned the poverty of Leibnizian optimism only after being deprived of the material comforts he enjoyed at the castle of the Baron Thundertentrunk. It took that poor Westphalian bastard the once suffered under military conscription, the horrors of the great Lisbon earthquake of 1755, exposure to interspecies sapien-simian sex, and the uglifying effects of age, to finally learn that in this worst of all possible worlds, the only practical wisdom is that we must cultivate our garden. Parallels between Candide and Pierre Bezukhov abound. Pierre, too, enjoyed an early life of luxury. Tolstoy's biographer A.N. Wilson, for instance, describes 19th century Russian aristocratic life as among the most privileged of the high lives available to mankind. How very high that was, Wilson writes, by the contemporary standards of other European countries, is revealed to any modern visitor to the army of the Kremlin in Moscow, or to the Winter Palace in Leningrad, where, in addition to the stupendous opulence of the coaches and costumes and uniforms and furniture, the sheer size and scale of it all are overwhelming. The Russian court, in all its imperial glory, was much the grandest thing in Europe, and far outshone the muted luxuries of Windsor, or even, a phrase one does not write lightly, the Habsburg splendor of the Schönbrunn. This is Pierre's natural environment. What has this privileged life taught him? Not much. So far, we've seen him striving for self-knowledge and improvement, but not much progress towards those ends has been made. Today, however, having temporarily distanced himself from his privilege during the Battle of Borodino, he finally does take some difficult steps forward. All around him today, he sees the opposite of his normal life. Whereas before there was the food and drink of balls and clubs, now there is only the famishment of war. The only company he keeps is the friendship of anxiety and loneliness. And it's here, when a group of Russian soldiers invites him to eat simple mash with them, that Pierre learns the value of abstinence and plain living. It's subtle, but it's there. Pierre truly savors, probably for the first time in his life, the food that he eats. The mash is more delicious than any food he had ever tasted, we're told. Pierre is too exhausted and bewildered to meditate on this experience. To readers of the novel, however, it is clear that this is the start of Pierre's gradual development from a confused boy to a self-fulfilled man. As we'll see, his suffering and material deprivation is just getting started. I'll have plenty to learn from in the upcoming chapters. Finally, it's curious to note that the lessons of deprivation seem to be working subconsciously on Pierre. When he returns to Mozhask, he absent-mindedly, though perhaps symbolically, passes his inn. It's as if he's moving beyond, however unconsciously, the material comforts of his privileged life, towards something much larger and fulfilling. Daily Meditation. Appetite and thirst are the natural sauce of life, and the secret to making even coarse bread and plain water seem delicious. Donald Robertson, Stoicism and the Art of Happiness. All right, so that concludes my reading of and reflection on chapter 233 of War and Peace. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for listening. Remember that if you'd like to support me, you can do so either by purchasing the ebook, A Year of War and Peace, becoming a patron at patreon.com, or making a one-time donation at PayPal. The links to all that are down below in the show notes. Tomorrow, we're going to be reading and reflecting on chapter 234 of War and Peace. I hope you'll join me. Until then, take care of yourselves and others.